the Crochet Provisional Cast-On for the Going Postal Wrap. For the Crochet Provisional Cast-On, you are going to need a crochet hook in a size appropriate for the yarn, a knitting needle. In this case, because we are going to need something with 2 tips and a double-pointed needle is not long enough, we're using a circular needle, a piece of waste yarn. We have a really long piece of waste yarn here because it's thick and gets used up rather quickly, and of course the project yarn that you're starting with. The first thing you need to do is to make a slip knot. Take your waste yarn, wrap it around your fingers, pick up the yarn underneath the loop with your crochet hook. Tension the yarn with your left hand as you will be crocheting, but only for the cast-on. Place the needle in your left hand over the tensioned yarn. With the crochet hook, yarn over and pull the yarn through the loop on the crochet hook. Move the yarn under the needle, yarn over, and bring the yarn through the loop on the crochet hook. Crochet a few more stitches than the number of stitches called for. For this swatch, I need 19 stitches, so I'm going to cast on 22 stitches in total. You do want to cast on 1 extra stitch that you will actually work into, because when you undo a provisional cast on and start working on the second side, you're going to have 1 stitch fewer than the number you cast on for the first side. You will get rid of this stitch on the second row of the first side. The additional extra stitches are there so that if you miscount the number of stitches cast on, you don't have to start all over again. The extra stitches will make no difference once you undo the provisional cast on, so this is an easy way to make your life a little bit easier. Once you have crocheted all the stitches onto the needle, crochet a bunch of chains off the needle to keep the end neat. Pull the yarn through the last stitch. That way it won't undo before we want it to, and then tie a very loose knot at the end so that you know that this is the end that you need to unravel from when the time comes. Pick up your working yarn and just start knitting with it. For the first row, just knit through the front loop for all stitches. Remember to knit that extra stitch that will be reduced away on the next row. The pattern may tell you to cast on that extra stitch, like my patterns do, but if not, you can still work that extra stitch and decrease it on the next row. Once you have the full number of stitches worked and you have double checked that you knit the correct number, you can just drop any extra crochet stitches that you worked just in case you miscounted. Now, work your project until it's time to remove the crochet chain and to start on the other side. First, undo the knot after the last chain stitch and remove the yarn end from that last chain. Pull out all the chain stitches that don't have any stitches coming from them. On this first chain, there are 2 strands. If you did not cast on an extra stitch when originally casting on, you can work into this loose end and wrap it around itself to create that extra stitch. But in this case, you can just let it go. Pick up that first real stitch and put it on your needle tip. You can either pull the waste yarn out and then pick the stitch up with your needle tip, or if you are more comfortable, you can put your needle tip into the stitch and only then pull the waste yarn out. You can do this 1 stitch at a time or do a number of stitches at once. Or, if you are brave enough, pull out all of the waste yarn and then pick up all of the stitches. Alternatively, you can use a much smaller needle or even a darning needle to pick up your stitches from the provisional cast on and pick up a number of stitches at once. It is difficult to do this with a thicker needle. Do whatever feels most comfortable for you and for the particular project. I tend to do several stitches at once unless the yarn is slippery and has a lot of pressure on it, or is drapey and the loops tend to collapse. However you do it, your aim is to release the stitches from the waste yarn. At the very end, you will come to this loop that looks like a stitch, but has only one strand of the waste yarn going through it. Pull the waste yarn all the way through and drop this stitch. As you can see, this is not a stitch from the original row worked into the cast on, and working that stitch would distort the final project. Count your stitches. As you are counting, some of these stitches look like yarn overs, but they are not. They only look that way because of the knit below stitches on side 1 of the project. We have 19 stitches, so we're all set for side 2. If you had not cast on that extra stitch at the start, you would have 1 stitch fewer than necessary, and you would have to finagle something to create that extra stitch. But because you planned ahead, you don't have to do that. Change to the working yarn. In this case, we're starting on the wrong side row. Slip that first stitch, then attach the working yarn, and work your way across. Your new stitches, going in the direction of side 2, are a half a stitch off from the stitches on side 1. See the tutorial for an explanation as to why.